We have present councillors Alex Allison, John Anderson. I don't think we have Councillor Bradley in the meeting. Don't have Councillor Bradley. We have present Councillor Walter Brogan and Robert Brown. Just check Councillor Archie Buchanan. We don't have Councillor Buchanan in the meeting. We have present Councillors Matthew Buchanan, Kalikis, Devlin. Just check if Councillor Donnelly's in the meeting. No, Councillor Donnelly's not in the meeting. We have present, we don't have Councillor Fagan in the meeting either. We have present Councillor Faulkner, Frame, Handybode. I'll just check if Councillor Horn is in the meeting. We don't have Councillor Horn. And we have present Councillor Hose, Logan, MacDonald, McClymont, Nelson, Nugent, Ross. I'll just check if Councillor Scott is in the meeting. We don't have Councillor Scott in the meeting, but we do have present Councillors Walker, Watson and Williams. And I'll hand back to the Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. So moving on to the agenda, item 1, are there any declarations of interest? No. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting, and that's pages 5 to 12 in your pack. Could I ask that these be approved as a correct record?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 3, monitoring items, the revenue budget monitoring 2023 to 2024 for the period 1st of April 23 to 23rd of February 2024, and that's pages 13 to 20. And could I ask Graham Booth to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. The purpose of the report, which is on pages 13 to 20 of your papers, is to provide information on actual expenditure against budget for the 1st of April 23 to the 23rd of February 24, and also to provide a forecast to for the year to 31st of March 2024. Section 5.1 notes that following the Council's probable outturn exercise, the resources report in a break-even position. As reported to previous committees, sections 5.2 and 5.3 note that within Children and Family Services, one-off funding has been used to contribute towards budget pressures this financial year, and the resource is working towards managing the overall budget pressure in children and families into 24-25. This is covered further at agenda item 9 to this committee as part of the Budget Recovery Actions update on Children and Family Services. Sections 5.4 to 5.6 outline the current position in relation to our adults and older people services. A break-even position has been reported, and included within this position is a commitment in relation to the IJB in relation to specific funding, which is not anticipated to spend this financial year, of £1.272 million. The Executive Committee in January approved that the IJB retains this non-recurring underspend within their reserves earmarked for future care costs. And the IJB in March approved the use of this underspend to address the balance of social care services funding gap for 24-25 and as a contribution to non-recurring bridging funding to support the implementation of 2024-25 savings. Section 5.7 notes the financial position to the 23rd of February with the resource reporting a break-even position. Appendices A to E on pages 16 to 20 provide details on the period 12 position, with detailed variance explanations and proposed variants for each of the services shown in appendices B to E. I refer members back to section 2 of the report. Committee is asked to note the forecast to the 31st of March 2024 of a break-even position after approved transfer to reserves, note the break-even position as at the 23rd of February, and to approve the proposed budget variants. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. I don't see any comments, questions. Do we agree to the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Item 4 is the Capital Budget Monitoring 2023 to 2024 from the 1st of April 2023 to the 23rd of February 2024, and it's pages 21 to 24. And could I ask Lorraine to speak to the report, please?
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Committee. This is the standard capital monitoring report then again, similar to revenue. It's the 5th for the current financial year, and it takes the spend position to the 23rd of February, which is accounting period 12. Section 3 gives you the background to the report and advises that the budget for the year is 22.030 million, and there's been no change to that budget since we last reported to this committee back in March. Section 5 then details the financial implications, and Section 5.1 notes the total capital programme of the 2.030 million. And in terms of spend anticipated for the year, Section 5.2 notes that the working projections when this report was written were that spend was looking to be about 2.6 million, which was an in-year overspend only of 570,000. And I say in-year overspend because it's timing only. Really, this is about the timing of spend on the community alarm project and the Swiss Plus replacement project, and the budgets required in 23-24 rather than 24-25. Funding for these projects will be brought forward from next financial year as we tidy up the year-end position. So in terms of the year-end position, I'm just noting in section 5.3 that the year-end is being finalised. We're working on an outturn report which will go to Executive Committee at the end of June, and then we'll bring it back to this committee for your information in terms of a year-end position in August time. Finally, section 5.4 then notes that as at the 23rd of February, we had anticipated spend of 1.850 and actual spend of 1.875. So we had an overspend of 45,000 at that point in time, and that mainly, again, reflects the timing of payments on the community alarms project specifically at that point. The position across the projects are detailed in Appendix A. The projects have progressed well, and I've got no issues to highlight to committee. So I'll be looking to refer committee back to the recommendations in section 2, that the Social Work Resources capital programme of 2.030 million and expenditure to date of 1.895 million be noted, and also that the projected outturn of 2.6 million be noted. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. I don't see any questions. Do we agree to section 2 recommendations in the report? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 5 is the workforce monitoring from January to March 2024. And that's pages 25 to 32. And could I ask Eileen to speak to the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. This is the standard workforce monitoring report for social work resources covering the period January to March 2024. So section 4.1 outlines the attendance statistics for committee, and the details are in Appendix 1. So the absence rate for the resource was 7.9% in March, and that's compared to a council-wide figure of 6.3%. This has remained the same compared to the previous month, and compared to last year, the figure has decreased by 0.3%. So the projected annual average for the resource is 7.2% compared to a council-wide figure of 5.4%. Committee will be aware that resource managers continue to follow the maximising attendance procedures and work with HR colleagues to ensure that all the supports are in place to enable employees to return to work and appropriate actions are taken. Section 4.2 to 4.5, the details are in Appendix 2, and the main points are that during the period there were 400 occupational health referrals, there were 8 disciplinary hearings, there was 1 grievance, and there was no dignity at work issues raised. There was 54 accidents or incidents recorded during the period, and there was 39 leavers that were eligible for an exit interview, and of them 26% completed exit interviews. In terms of all the posts that became vacant, the details are in Appendix 2A, and there was 69 posts that became vacant. 59 of these posts will be filled. 4 were due to end because of a fixed term contract. There was 5 held pending a review of the service, and there was 1 post removed for savings. In general, in terms of recruitment, it's ongoing across all services across the resource, and during the period there was 8 home carers that were recruited, there was 10 social workers recruited and 10 social work assistants, for example, and this was across all localities. And I'm referring committee back to section 2 and asking that the workforce monitoring information for social work resources covering the period January to March 2024 be noted. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. I have a couple of questions. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just about 4.1 in the monitoring statistics for attendance. And we note that it's at 7.9%, a reduction of 0.3%, which is very, very little. Just looking at the absence trends, are we doing anything different to try and get people to come to work? The implications this has for other staff members as well as users and their families while people are currently off sick. So it's looking at that absent trend and how we're managing it. I know that we do have management policies and procedures in maximising attendance, but we need to get people to stay at work and come to work because it's putting pressure on our services. And I just wonder what we're doing differently away from the part of the maximising attendance. Is there anything else that we are trying as a resource to try and get people to come to work and remain at work.
Yeah, like I say, we're continuing to monitor our procedures and ensure all the appropriate actions are taken. There's monthly absence meetings with heads of service that talk about absence. It's also discussed regularly at our senior management team, and within personnel we are reviewing our own policy and procedures in terms of exactly that, looking to see if we can do something different. Is there something different there? And it's looking not just internally but looking externally to identify areas of good practice. So we'll continue to work in that area. So it is something that we're continuing to look at. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. Robert?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to ask about 5.1, where it shows a decrease of 31 in the number of employees in post over that period. I wonder if there's anything significant in that, because we're trying obviously to recruit various sorts of workforce staff, aren't we? One might have expected that to have gone up a little bit. What's the composition of the 31? Is there any sort of system or magic to it, as it were?
I don't have all the details in terms of the breakdown, but I certainly can provide that to you. But we do continue to look at any trends. There's certainly no trends that have been highlighted in terms of we're not losing people in particular either localities or in particular posts. And if that's highlighted, then that's something that we would do and then we would react to.
Right, okay, that's fine. I don't need to have the further information. It was just to know whether there was any trends coming out of it. That was really the issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kirsty?
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Eileen. I wondered if you could elaborate, please, on why absence figures in social work, provide a few possible explanations why absence figures in social work are higher than perhaps other areas of the council. Thanks.
Yeah, certainly, I think, as has been discussed before, in terms of social work, the demographic of the employees within social work, we've got an older an ageing workforce, so we do tend to see people that maybe have more longer term absences and then therefore require a bit more support to enable them to return to work. So that's why we tend to see that within social work the absences are higher in comparison to other resources, for example. So is that enough detail for you? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
Thanks, Chair. No, it was just maybe on Robert's question. Would it maybe be an idea you could actually add in people who, I know you've got an ageing workforce, so perhaps some of those leavers were retirees who didn't really want to do an exit interview, but you could maybe have put them on the table. Is that maybe the case?
In terms of leavers, when we talk about leavers that are eligible for an interview, that's the leavers that are leaving voluntarily. It doesn't include retirees. That's how there's that difference between when we talk about posts becoming vacant and also the employees that leave eligible for an interview. The difference is not all of them, and also some of them are maybe going through a process and they leave either through a disciplinary process, a capability process, and retirals come into that as well, and the end of a fixed term contract.
Thank you. Councillor Frame?
Hi, thanks, Chair. Just a quick question. Obviously picking up on all the other questions that have been asked, so it's round about that. My worry is how many of the people absences is it down to stress and over with the workload? We know that social work resource is one of the heaviest resources and one of the resources that are under pressure. And what help are we giving to our employees to make sure that they are able to cope with the stress and the workload in their jobs? Thank you.
So in terms of the period that's been reported of them, about 3.1% is accounted for as psychological absences. So we do know that it is one of the main reasons for absence, not just within social work resources, but also across the council. We continue to offer supports through our employee assistance programme, and I think has been reported earlier to committee. We have recently engaged with an enhanced occupational health service particularly around the psychological supports over and above what was offered previously, an app that offers immediate counselling in terms of immediate contact, and also referring on for further more specialist counselling is now available to employees. And as I say, is been promoted well, not only through reporting through to committees, but also through the trade unions are very supportive of this, and through JICCs. So again, that's all part of the mix in terms of what we're doing in terms of employee support, and will be part of this ongoing review that I mentioned earlier.
Okay, thanks, Eileen. I don't see any more questions. Do we agree to the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6 is the Social Work Register update, and that's pages 33 to 44. And could I ask Craig to speak to the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So members will recognise the report as set out within the papers. We provided background at section 3, and then in section 4.2 we have identified those areas that still sit as very high risks, namely funding, workforce, market provider capacity, the ability to deliver against the strategic commissioning plan, and cost of living. The detail around mitigating factors are set out in Appendix 2 at page 39 against each of those. Thereafter, we have described where some of those risks have reduced or changed over the last reporting period. So you'll see there, for instance, that public protection has gone from very high 16 to high 12 in recognition of the mitigating factors we've put in, and indeed the fact that we are protecting those particular services as part of our sustainability and value programme. Whilst if you look at winter, we have reduced that significantly now that we are through the main winter period and are back into what we describe as more normal working. We've also got a further range of risks that relate to the resource, and these are provided at 4.3. And again, there's additional detail provided in Appendix 3 at page 43, and again, the respective mitigating factors linked to those. And thereafter, I would take members back to the recommendations as set out in section 2. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just on 4.2, Craig, just about the winter demand pressures, and you mentioned that going back to normal working. Whilst we move from winter into some kind of sort of summer, if you like, not given today's weather forecast, but I don't think we're actually seeing that in acute services. If we're moving away from those winter pressures, I see that you've reduced that from a high score to a low score, but you're not seeing that in acute services at the moment. These figures are still high. People are still currently unwell from various different bugs and everything that's floating about. And again, is that also what's shown into our absence trend of that high absence figure? Is that playing into that fact? Because I think moving it from a high to the low, I think, is a wee bit immature. I think we should still be sitting a wee bit higher than that, because I don't think those winter pressures have subsided just yet.
Yeah, thank you. So, in terms of winter, there's a specific set of circumstances that relate to winter, and we have been through the other side of those. However, your point is absolutely spot on in terms of the ongoing pressures in the system. And if you were to see the IGB risk report, it still recognises unscheduled care as part of NHS Lanarkshire's high risks, because they recognise that that is still a high risk area. And again, you're also correct in that access to secondary care services is one of the areas that's putting additional pressure on our GPs, our primary care services, but also it means that people who are unwell are now having to spend longer unwell because they're not able to access the services as timelessly as they were able to do pre-pandemic. And there's a whole range of work ongoing to try and recover that. So as far as the NHS Lanarkshire risk register is concerned, it still has that as a high risk. But in terms of social work resources and the issues that we had to take to manage winter, then we're now over the worst of that. And I'll come on later on and talk specifically about winter as part of a later paper in the agenda.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Alec?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My ignorance, Craig. Appendix 3 shows a social work residual risk score and a council residual risk score. What's the difference? Other than the numbers on the page, obviously.
Yeah, so where there is the council high risks, they look at the council overall. However, there are some bits where it's unique to that particular resource. And in our scenario, we believe we have taken sufficient mitigating actions that we've been able to reduce the risk for our element of the business. So that's why you'll sometimes see a slight variation between what is in the overall corporate risk and that which relates specifically to social work resources.
Can you maybe, sorry, through you, Chair, could you maybe then indicate what work has been done cross resources? Because to have a score of 20 to achieve standards and scrutiny levels identified by regulatory bodies is quite worrying, bearing in mind what happened a few years ago in Hamilton.
So we recognise that there will always be issues that might pertain to standards and how we mitigate against those. And there's a matrix that says, here is the potential for this to happen, and this is the impact if it happens. So the impact for a number of these things is always likely to be relatively high. So if you take a public protection issue and something goes wrong, the impact will be high. So when, despite the mitigating factors you put in place, even if you are very confident as you can be, recognising, you know, it's human systems and people make mistakes, we still have an impact of the thing when it goes wrong. And if the impact scores very high, then when you do the X and Y score, it will still come out at a high risk. So if you look at Appendix 1, which has got the matrix in it, you'll see that, you know, there's something about the likelihood and there's something else about the impact. So even for areas where we believe we've put in place systems that reduce the likelihood, the fact that the impact is still very high means that it comes out at a high risk.
Okay, thanks, Craig. I think that clarified that really well. Kirsty?
Thanks, Chair. Craig, thank you very much for this report. I would just like to welcome the reduction from very high to high in terms of meeting public protection and legislative duties, although obviously we hope that that will continue on a downwards trend. Just picking up really on the cost of living crisis, and just, I suppose, an observation that social work, perhaps more than any other resource, is impacted in terms of working with the most vulnerable in our communities, obviously in terms of mental distress, deprivation, debt, etc. Thank you.
Yes, agreed. It does impact a lot. I think one of the things, though, that is useful to make people aware of is that we are increasing the range of supports that are out there that can help signpost people to help. And this is one of the areas where, working together across the wider community planning partnership, there are significant benefits to be gained. So a number of GP practices, the vast bulk of GP practices, have now got something called GP link workers. And if a GP comes across somebody who they believe that their distress is related to financial distress or housing issues, then they can signpost to the GP link worker, who in turn will link them into something like Money Matters or Citizens Advice or other areas where they can try and bring that support. But likewise, they can also flag up to social work if they believe that there is an area of risk that social work should be aware of. So it is an area where we're looking to try and work collectively across our wider partners.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I know the link workers, not just across Lanarkshire, but across Glasgow, have evaluated really well. And it's really interesting if you get to see some of the reports in terms of the numbers of people that they've signposted to other services, because that all comes down to relieving the pressure in primary care as well, and allowing the GPs more time to spend in complex cases. And I think link workers have been absolutely essential in that. It might, even through the IGB, it might be useful at some point just to get an overall picture of what kind of cases they are signposting and what kind of things that they're dealing with. Might be really useful. David. Sorry, Sam, I thought David was first on. You go.
No, at all. Good morning, everybody. Just to add to that point, and something this picks up on something that Alex was alluding to earlier on, Councillor Allison, that although there's areas that we will obviously work to mitigate the impacts, what we obviously want to see is a reduction in poverty, and particularly child poverty, across the area, which is why this then ties into the wider work that the Council as a whole is doing, as well as other community planning partners in the way that Craig's articulated. So for me, I'd particularly highlight the work, for example, that the Council has done in terms of reducing the cost of the school day. So, in other words, areas and initiatives that sit within other resources that actually are critical in terms of us managing both the impact on the most vulnerable and increasingly high levels of vulnerability within our communities, which also will help us mitigate the overall demand for support from social care and social work services. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and phrase this without sounding alarmist or whatever, but just I've a concern about where we're going, and when you look at the number of high risk and the consequences of the high risk, considering the people, the vulnerable people that we're dealing with, and putting that in the context of budget and availability of staff, where are we going really with social work? And are some things going to need to be jettisoned, for want of a better word, than to focus on other things and put resources into other things? And are we getting to the stage that we can't do the gambit that we're doing just now, albeit desirable? And I just, when I look at this and see the very high risk and the chances of maybe not delivering, and then we hit these high risks, I think personally I would rather know sooner rather than later before we hit the buffers on it, and I maybe just look for comment on that. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think we might be there. I'll pass over to Sue.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. So, and you've raised this in previous meetings, and so I'll give you the same response I've given previously. So, yes, the reason we've taken the step of bringing the risk register to every meeting of the Social Work Resources Committee is a reflection of the concern that not just myself, but the Chief Social Work Officer and indeed the Chief Executive have in terms of the position we find ourselves in here, as is the case right across Scotland in respect of it. So, the committee has been appraised for some time now, I would say well over a year, in terms of, one, the financial challenges that are having to be faced. That's then reflected in decisions that the IGB have made, and indeed there's a further report in terms of the budget recovery process for children's social work in particular that's in front of you, following up a previous paper from last time round. Similarly, we've talked at length about the workforce crisis across Scotland in terms of supply. So when we have discussions about our ability to retain a workforce, that's because it's increasingly becoming difficult to recruit for key areas of staffing, particularly some of our areas of social work, hence why the redesign work we're undertaking across adult, older people's, children's and justice service is so important in terms of the implementation that, again, that was agreed last summer by this committee. And when we then talk about the impact on performance, again, we've talked previously, as indeed a key Chief Executive has talked more widely, around the fact that our area, as indeed other parts of the Council, is having to increasingly think about how we do things, how we prioritise our staff's capabilities and our resources and the people who need it the most. And absolutely, they're therefore going to be areas of support which previously have been provided in our communities that are just not going to be provided going forward, unless, of course, we have more money or we're able to recruit more staff. But ultimately, we can only provide services with the resource that we've got. And as you'll have noted within it, there are considerable areas of activity we're undertaking to at least provide stability and clarity about what we're able to do, so we can provide confidence to our communities that at least they know they will be able to get X, if not necessarily X and Y, and similarly provide some clarity to our staff that they know they're working in as stable environment as possible despite the very tumultuous environment that we're all having to navigate across the piece. But actually, make no mistake, and I've been clear about this for many months now, these are, we talk about there being a social work crisis right across the country. Yes, and that's reflected in this report here. We are doing everything we can do to make sure that we mitigate the risks, hence why, for example, we're prioritising activity around public protection and that movement of the risk downwards. But we do that with care. We are certainly not cavalier in terms of these issues, and that's why we will continue to ensure this committee and indeed the Council as a whole are appraised in the position as we move forward through what will continue to be very challenging times. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Suman. Robert?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. It's really a thought stimulated by what Alec was saying about Hamilton earlier on. There's an issue, the reference at risk number 1 to scrutiny levels and standards from regulatory bodies. And I wanted really to ask two things. I mean, first of all, are we due to have on the programme of inspections other things that are kind of coming down the line shortly? And secondly, just to ensure that we're still at the point where inspection reports come back to committee, because there was an issue on that one when we had the Hamilton and Rutherland care home services, where they hadn't come to committee and we weren't aware of what turned out to be quite significant reports at that particular time.
Chair, thank you. Thanks for the question, Councillor Brown, as well. You're quite right to point out, and it's been referenced before, that there was a lack of communication previously about inspections and where there was risk associated within the service. I'd like to think over the past couple of years we've been a lot more transparent with that, and we gave a commitment after the Hamilton and Rutherland inspections that we would bring 6 monthly reports of all inspections within the service, and we're in that cycle. So the next inspection cycle is August for us to bring a report, and we'll bring a committee report to that one. We still have the regular annual inspections of the elderly care homes and the children's houses, and we report on them. In relation to the care at home service, we've not had one recently, but we have been notified that the Clydesdale area is going to be inspected, and if that's concluded by August, we'll bring the update to the committee then. And when we get notification of any further inspections, we'll bring that and be as transparent as possible for it. That would be in our interests as well, because it is an interest, as been referenced. If there's risks within the system, the committee need to know about it as early as possible, so that as a council or a committee we can jointly work together to mitigate those risks going forward. So we'll bring that forward at the next August committee.
I suppose the underlying point on that question, though, is really whether you had concerns with the financial pressures and all the other things that are going on, whether there were areas that might give us concern when it comes to these inspection reports, or whether you're reasonably confident, if you like, that they will be okay in terms of meeting the standards that are required by the bodies.
Councillor, what I'd say is that I'm confident that we've got good scrutiny and governance across all the registered services, and we take that seriously in terms of the senior officers' responsibilities. There will be pressure if, while we've got budget pressures, it means that we're going to have to prioritise our statutory requirements and those most vulnerable. Hence why you're seeing the public protection risk is coming down, because we've divested in other areas. What that will result in, as the Chief Officer's identified and the Director, is that we'll see performance levels dip in other areas that are seen as less intense, and we'll have to accept that, and the committee will either decide whether it's acceptable or not going forward. But in terms of the sustainability and values options appraisal tool, that's clearly a tool that's transparent for our senior managers, but also as elected members, where we will prioritise the most need, and it will be in the public protection arrangements.
Okay, thanks, Liam. I don't have any more questions. We agree to the recommendations in the report.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to items for decision. Item 7, Social Work Resource Plan 2024-25, and it's pages 45 to 66. And could I ask, I think Liam's going to speak to this again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. The purpose of the report is to present the Social Work Resources Plan for 2024-25 and to seek approval and note the monitoring arrangements that are identified. In relation to the background of the report at section 3, you'll see that the resource plans for 24-25 are prepared in line with the corporate resource planning guidance. The resource plan is a key element of the Council's performance management arrangement, and it provides details of the context within which resources operates and establishes actions and measures for the year ahead, and the priorities are aligned with the Council's Plan Connect for 2022-2027. The details of this are then included within the key work objectives of individual officers, and this demonstrates the golden thread of performance management, which ensures a clear understanding of the Council's vision, values and priorities and outcomes at all levels. You'll see within the report at section 3 as well that this is a familiar format for the committees, and it's been established since 2007. Any risks associated with the report are identified within the Resource Risk Register, and as Craig's already identified at Agenda Item 6, these are reported regularly now at the committees. Following approval of the individual resource plan, this will be presented to the Executive Committee on the 26th of June for noting. At section 4 within the report, you'll see that we identified that the plan is attached to Appendix 1, and in relation to the headlines, it's a formal format which we follow across all resources, and the 5 headings are identified at 4.1. The resource has developed performance measures and an action plan, and these are set out at section 4 within the resource plan, and these key strategic measures are included in the Council plan. In relation to the monitoring and reporting, that's identified at 4.3 within the report, and you'll see that we've identified that the committee will receive an update at Q2 and Q4, and that will be in September and April of March 2025. That will show the end of year. Within the report, and for this report, there are no financial implications associated with the report. However, the financial implications for delivery of the plan are highlighted at section 5 within the plan, and the financial implications in relation to revenue and capital are reported at each committee for scrutiny. If I can refer members back to section 2 of the report and the 5 recommendations for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Liam. I don't see any questions. Oh, sorry, Alan.
Page 56, 2.6, the 3rd paragraph and the 4th paragraph. Care at home service being augmented by 4 new home first teams. In view of the previous discussion about financial challenges and recruitment challenges, how many people are involved in that and what was the cost? And can I supplement that with saying in paragraph 4, the Blantyre Life, it says there it does rehabilitation. The care at home service reablement, according to Google, they're 2 very similar things. Are we having a duplication of service there? In regard to the Blantyre Life, the budget for that was 43 staff at a cost of £1.7 million. And the only difference for the care at home people was that the ones in the Blantyre Life were clinically assessed for discharge. If I could have an answer to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I can pick that up, Councillor. So in terms of the Home First teams, you'll remember that they came about through investment the Council was given by Scottish Government to develop multidisciplinary team working and expand the care at home service. So we got approval from the IGB and this committee to establish the reablement teams. So the intention of those was to make sure we had effective assessment at the earliest opportunity and supported people to regain or maintain their kind of independence and functioning. So those teams are now established across each of the localities. There's still a bit of recruitment ongoing in a couple of areas, but the service is almost fully established now and is operating well, and we're seeing good outcomes in terms of people's care being reduced and picking them up promptly from the hospital sites. Blantyre Life fits within a similar kind of construct, the difference being that it provides a bed-based service as opposed to a service in the person's own home. To date, I think we've had about 150 people through Blantyre Life, and again, the vast majority of those folks are going home with a reduced level of need for care, so that the model seems to be effective in supporting people to, again, regain and retain their independence and go home and live safely in their own home environment.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Alan.
They're very similar, the 2 projects. Reablement and reablement and the rehabilitation.
they're both part of a spectrum of intervention. You're right, some of the terminology is a bit kind of grey and overlaps, but essentially the intentions of both services is to support people to get back home, to maintain and regain their independence, and live with the minimal level of service that they require. So we've got a range of services and offers, so we can support the person within their own home environment, or we can support them in a homely environment if they need a bit more intensive support to allow them to get back home safely. So that's the difference between the two services. So they've both got the same outcomes at the end of the day, but one is bed-based, quite on a more modest scale overall, and the other one is targeted at people in their own home.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Could I just ask, have we seen the evaluation of Blantyre Life yet? I know we had asked for it previously at this committee, and I think it was spring it was supposed to be coming to social work and IGB.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got a commitment for people to come through, so we've got it timelined. It was because of the pressure that we had, it took a bit longer to get that work done, but we've certainly got it timelined for the next IGB coming up, and then it will be brought to the next round of this committee. So absolutely, there is that's in hand.
Okay, thanks, because obviously, you know, it's a very innovative service, and it would be really interesting to see what the impact is in terms of informing us how we go forward with you know, a range of developments like the progressive housing framework, all of that, and it would be really informative in terms of how we have to prioritise and redesign. The more we can do that in an evidence base, the better. And I think, in response to Alan, it is part of a kind of range of different innovative services and different ways of doing things. But I agree, we need to kind of have a look at the impact and the outcomes. Sorry, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just about the outcomes. Liam, I'm doing some work with the Positive Future courses run by the veterans. Been doing a lot of work with them, and unpaid community justice, non-custodial work that goes on out there. And I think that would have been good to see in the plan about how the veterans are getting support through our services and the unpaid work in the community. The work that they do out there is absolutely tremendous, and I think it's something that should be within your resource plan. Excuse my ignorance if it's already there, but I definitely didn't see anything referring to that. And I think that Positive Futures and About Turn, that course it runs for, and it's not just for veterans, because we don't want to alienate just veterans, but certainly it's run by a veteran. And I think we as councillors need to know more about what that work is that's ongoing out there, because after I found out about it, I think that the work that's ongoing, I think we as councillors in this council should be proud of that course that's being run by our veterans out there in the community.
Thanks, Richard. Liam?
Probably say a comment. I might ask Craig to come in because he's our veterans lead as well. We've got a lot of very good examples that are out there of work that's taking place, and we've not mentioned all the good examples within the resource plan because we have to sort of limit the numbers of that. But what we'd like to think is that we've got an unpaid work report that comes annually, and I'd like to think that that would be referenced within that, and even through things like the Chief Social Work Officer report, where we've got good practice, we try and highlight that within the Chief Social Work Officer report. But what it says, if we were to list all the good practice examples, we might look a wee bit big-headed and blowing our own trumpet. So we try and be a wee bit reserved about how we do that as well. But there are loads of good examples, not just the veterans within that, across the services.
No, I get your point about it, but I think given the work that goes out to our veterans, and they always seem to be the ones who are forgotten, so I think it's very... I agree with some of your sentiments round about it, but I personally think something should be in that resource plan about that Positive Future changes. It has to be. It's good work that's being done by this council, and I think other local councils can take something from that, and I think it's something to be proud of at the same time. So while I agree, I slightly disagree with you as well. I think something should be in there about that Positive Future changes and About Turn.
Yeah, thanks. So just to pick up the bit specifically around veterans, I'm the veterans champion for NHS Lanarkshire, and I also get involved in supporting anything that comes through social work. Within Lanarkshire, we've got a very, very good firm base arrangement. So it's Councillor Horsham that leads on that from South Lanarkshire, and he's got equivalent from North. And there's also a report that gets done an annual report that would get done for the council around veterans, and it might well be that some of the work that you're describing should be well placed in there, because you're right, it is a good example of where we're able to do some of that work. And what I would say is that over the last 2 or 3 years in particular, some of the things that we've been able to do in support of veterans has been really, really good. And we have got very good joint working. So I will get approaches from quite often like SAFA or from regimental associations describing somebody that's in particular distress, and between social work, housing colleagues, occasionally education and NHS, we will make sure that we've got a joined up approach to try and resolve that where we can. It's not always that there's a solution, but we will try and find and work with them. But yeah, so there are opportunities there to showcase this stuff a bit more, and we should be doing that. There's also Armed Forces Week coming up in around, I think it's the 24th of June or something. So again, there's maybe something we can do with our comms colleagues to highlight some of the work that we're doing around that.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, I would appreciate that, and I think it's good to get that in some other reports as well. I note this report isn't this isn't for noting, this is for a recommendation. So my recommendation, I'm happy to accept it, Chair, but with that part in that we put in about, there was a bit of work put in there about positive changes and about something in that report going forward. I'd be happy to move that as an amendment to the actual full motion, Chair.
So you're in relation specifically to veterans? Yeah. Okay, is that seconded? Yeah. Is the meeting agreeable to that? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of the work that we do is very, very positive, and I think it would be good to actually have that highlighted in the report, even as good practice for other authorities and organisations that will be looking at the plan. I think it would be good to highlight actually what this authority does in relation to veterans, which has been way out in front, I think, in terms of the level of support and service. Eileen.
Thanks, Chair. It's nothing to do, I'm happy to put the veteran thing, but it's probably to do with, that's part of it, but we don't seem to get out the work that we do out to the great public very well, in my view. Just recently I've spoken to 4 different people who didn't know that about, you know, the hospital at home, which was a great service to them when the people came. They didn't know about Lanarkshire Carers Association. They didn't know about different things that go on. So I don't know how we could sort of push it a bit more. But I think once people get to know about it, they're surprised at the amount of things that's there that they could tap into, but they don't know how to tap in the, you know, in the first instance. I agree that since Jim Handybode started it for us here, that and he was ex-service himself, and it went in leaps and bounds, and we were, and still probably are, the forefront in Scotland for veterans. But there is other organisations out there that we should maybe be pushing a wee bit into the public to let the public know what's there and what they could actually tap into, because it's tremendous the amount of work that goes on that sometimes people don't know about.
Thanks, Eileen. Craig?
Yeah, thank you. And that's very timely. We are doing some work looking to try and describe some of the things that are going on across the localities, but we're also doing work with your third sector colleagues, Lanarkshire Carers, etc., to be saying how can we try and publicise some of the work that you're doing. But some of that is about supporting what they're doing as opposed to necessarily us doing it in their behalf. And it goes back to the bit earlier around signposting and community link workers and wayfinders and things like that. So there's a fair bit of work we're doing around that, and it's one of the things where we absolutely recognise, again, I'll touch on the winter plan shortly, but we will need to change the way we provide services to meet future demand, and the only way we're going to be able to do that successfully is to take the public along with us, for the public to help shape some of those future services. So getting communication out there is going to be really, really important. So, yeah, spot on.
Thanks, Craig. I don't see any more questions. Are people happy to agree the recommendations with the addition that would put some more information regarding the work we're doing around veterans? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Next item, item 8, Justice Social Work Modernisation Programme update, and that's pages 67 to 72. And could I ask Gillian Booth to speak to the report, please? I think she's online.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair and committee members, for this opportunity to present the Justice Social Work Modernisation Programme update. The purpose of the report is to update you on our programme, and Section 3 highlights the Social Work Scotland Setting the Bar report in 2022, which established that 1 in 4 qualified social workers leave the profession within 6 years. With such retention challenges, it's imperative that social work resources consider how they mitigate against these risks in the future. This paper outlines how justice services propose to address these issues and improve our position as an employer in this workforce. Section 3.2 outlines the areas we wish to build capacity within. These are the establishment of a dedicated justice multi-agency public protection arrangement service known as MAPA, our violent and sex offender register system known as VISA, in terms of the replacement arrangements for that in the next 2 years, our offending behaviour group work programme within locality teams, our peer mentor services, and diversion from prosecution. So Section 4 outlines the increase in MAPA Level 1 arrangements in 2023. It's been identified from some extensive scoping work that between 2014 and 2022, there'd been a 57% increase in the volume of MAPA Level 1 cases in Lanarkshire. Should these trends continue, by 2030, it is projected there could be over 1,000 MAPA cases, a third higher than in 2022. In order to strengthen local arrangements within social work to address this increasing demand, it is proposed to establish a dedicated MAPA team, and this would do a number of things. It would develop and sustain a knowledgeable and best practice service to manage level 1, 2 and 3 MAPA cases. It would future-proof increasing workloads and provide consistent approach to the application of risk assessments in terms of our Risk Management Authority guidance and FRAME, which is the framework for risk management and evaluation. It would also allow us to ensure completion of environmental risk assessments within timescales and provide staff with a sound knowledge base of all aspects of working with people who've been committed of sexual offending in terms of the interventions we provide and risk management. To support the management and oversight of this team, it is proposed that the current temporary operations manager post is made permanent so as to ensure the necessary governance arrangements in relation to risk assessment, planning and quality assurance that the strategic oversight group require. In addition to this, Section 4.6 outlines the next steps to the VISA replacement system, which is called MAPS. This will be incorporated into the Justice MAPA team to support essential vetting requirements for its use. For that reason, it's proposed to continue the temporary MAPA admin post approved by committee in February 2023 for a further 2 years. Section 4.8 and 4.9 covers our commitment to providing effective interventions to addressing offending behaviour, and this aligns with the Community Justice Outcome Improvement Plan and National Aim 2. Local analysis indicates that 64% of community payback orders have service users with low and medium risks that we believe would be appropriate to support initially on a group work programme for then to be consolidated into one-to-one work with a social worker or social work assistant. And this will promote learning into practice and reinforce individual case planning. In order to facilitate this development, It is proposed to recruit a full-time programme coordinator to organise, facilitate and manage the group work and scheduling across the locality teams. Section 4.10 evidences the benefits of expanding our peer mentor service based on independent evaluation from Iconic Consultancy in 2023, as previously been provided to committee. In light of the continuing increase in community payback orders, recovery-orientated peer mentors within localities will strengthen and support statutory work. It is for this reason we are proposing a further 2 peer mentors to this establishment. Our final ask relates to diversion from prosecution in section 4.12. Local analysis has evidence that over the last 18 months, there has been an increase in complex and enhanced types of offences, which traditionally would have been not considered from diversion from prosecution. This reflects a policy direction from the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, in which there is a presumption that proceedings of domestic abuse and violence may be rebutted and alternative action taken in exceptional circumstances. This is also including contact and non-contact sexual offending. It is anticipated that this new diversion guidance, due to be published later in 2024, will set out expectations for enhanced diversion cases for each community justice partnership. In order to strengthen local arrangements in respect of diversion, we propose an additional qualified social worker to be added to the Justice Social Work establishment. Section 5 presents the following establishment on a permanent basis, as well as the MAPA Clerical Assistant temporary post. It is also worth highlighting in section 9.2 the extensive staff consultation that took place with Justice Social Work staff last year that focused on better understanding frontline staff's view on how we shape our services going forward. These sessions were informative and have helped develop the decisions we have made to support the modern and progressive Justice Social Work service in South Lanarkshire. May I conclude today's paper by asking the committee to approve the following recommendations. 1. Note the update to the Social Work Modernisation Programme in respect of justice services, and that the posts presented are added to the Social Work Resource Establishment detailed in 5.0. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Gillian. I think this is a very positive report, and in terms of what we were saying earlier about being evidence-based, I mean, the evidence is fairly clear in terms of the reduction in the numbers of people re-offending and the numbers of people going through the revolving door system after they've actually been supported by a range of these different services. And I say it's very important in terms of the evidence we've got that's actually demonstrating that. And it certainly beats the recent suggestion just to arrest fewer people. Sorry, Alec. Robert.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, the direction of travel is obviously one we will support, but in a way the proof of the pudding is really at the end of the day whether the community payback orders, the diversion from prosecution results ultimately in less people re-offending and causing trouble to communities. And I wonder if we're keeping an eye on the kind of effectiveness of, for example, the community payback orders, other stats we can have that give us an indication that the changes that have been made over time are proving to be effective. With regard to 410, which talked about the 64% of community payback orders with low and medium risks and the new officer and all of that, can I get a bit more flavour of that? Because that sounds as if it's something that we're either doing already to some degree, or we're doing it on a one-to-one basis. But do we really need an additional staff member to coordinate all this stuff? It seems a bit bureaucratically heavy at first glance, but there's obviously background to that. Could I have a bit of flavour about 410, please?
Okay, Gillian, do you want to take that thing?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for that question. Yes, I mean, when we undertook our locality review back in, I think it was around about 2018 and 2019, where we reviewed a number of cases in terms of how good our interventions were, what the standard was, and how consistently we applied interventions, one of the areas we recognised across the board with the localities that we were quite weak on that aspect of effective interventions, extremely good at building a relationship-based practice, but actually when it came to being able to actually demonstrate a consistent programme of work with somebody, it was an area we needed to develop in. And that there's numerous research and studies that I could provide to the members around about the effectiveness of group work. And we already see that with our moving forward making changes for those convicted of sexual offences, as well as our Caledonian programme for people convicted of domestic abuse offences. So there's a plethora there to say that that is a very effective way of helping people to come out of the justice system. However, what we know with those group work programmes is they are actually quite small in numbers. However, what we are proposing with the 4 localities is putting a very high number of people through the groups, and that would be on a rolling basis. Because of that, and because we want our social workers and our social work assistants to focus on developing the work that they're going to be undertaking, evaluating the work and ensuring that appropriate follow-up work is applied to our service users, we need to take away the whole administration and scheduling part of that. And we think that would sit best with a coordinator role. And I think if I can draw some parallels to what we see in our unpaid work service, where we have unpaid work coordinators who are very effective at coordinating and managing schedules of work for people to go out and pay back to the community. So a similar model to that. We know that in some other areas that is a model that's been applied as well. So it's for those reasons that we think that this would be the right approach to take, and hence the proposal for a group work programme coordinator. I hope that helps answer the question.
Robert, sorry, did you want to come back in? No. Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, I agree with Gillian there. There was recently the Criminal Justice Conference that was organised by Gillian and her colleagues, and we looked at a lot of that evidence-based information and the impact that some of the services had been having, which had been very positive in relation to supporting people and keeping them out of prison. So this paper is based on that in terms of the positive outcomes that this type of development and services actually creates for people. And that I would say that conference was very good, very informative. We spoke to a lot of people who'd been through some of the services, actually spoke to the delegates on the day, and their experiences were very positive, and the progress that they had made had been phenomenal. So, I mean, I agree in terms of the proposals in this paper that the evidence is there in terms of the outcomes and impact of those interventions, because we did actually see quite a bit of the evidence on that day. David?
Thanks, Chair. Given the theme running through the meeting is about lack of finance and social work, we're looking here at 5 additional permanent new posts, if I'm reading this right, and 1 fixed term post for 23 months. Financial implications state money's coming from the ring fence grant, the recurring ring fence grant, a 0.6 million provided in 24-25. What guarantees have we got of that going forward? And if not, how's that going to be funded? These posts going to be funded? Thanks.
Okay, Gillian?
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. We obviously got additional monies this year from the additional £14 million that the Scottish Government had given Justice Social Work Services nationally. So obviously we got a proportion of that, as is highlighted in 6.1. We have been told that will be recurring monies. And based on that, that's why we're putting the proposal of the establishment forward. I agree you can never be certain of what the financial landscape is going to be like going forward. And in those circumstances, we would need to then reassess our arrangements and staffing establishment. But for now, we understand that money remains ring-fenced and reoccurring. Hope that helps answer the question.
It does help, but it's a bit worrying in so much that we're taking on permanent staff that ultimately, if the money that's coming through to Slough stops coming through, it's going to be another burden on the social work resources budget. So I presume we're going with that with our eyes open, that it is the reality of the situation. The likelihood is nationally budgets are getting slashed all over the place as well, so the likelihood is this will get slashed at some point and we'll be left with a burden on that.
So I'm not really, I mean, are you suggesting that we shouldn't be going ahead with this at the moment? I mean, I think we have to really live in the situation that we're in. At the moment we know that the money is reoccurring. Suman, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. So one, to provide a bit of reassurance to committee. Actually all these questions are ones that we've spent a lot of time on. So we don't bring reports here until we've actually battle tested them with exactly those questions around one, are we creating unnecessary bureaucracy, or are we enhancing our capacity? So that's, and secondly, in terms of our confidence around the funding arrangements. So you're entirely right, Councillor Watson. There's a high degree of uncertainty around all areas of the public finances at this point. Again, and we've got a grant for this. It's ring fence. It's only for justice services that come through from government. Government has told us that the enhancement that's been provided here will be ring fence. As for all of these elements of them, we will take them at their word in terms of what's been provided to us and what we've had in writing at this point. It's also something that, going back to the earlier discussion we've had about risk, indeed concerns that this committee has actually just raised today about the arrangements put in place for public protection. This has been presented in terms of a balance of risks then, that we accept and understand the uncertainties of the public finances overall. But as I said, we've been given the assurance that this will be ring-fenced money. If there was any change to that, I'm sure I'd be looking for the committee support and going back to government to kind of highlight if there was a change in position. But at this point, government have said it's ring-fenced, so we will take them at their word. And the areas that have been highlighted, particularly in terms of the report in front of you, but especially in terms of how Gillian's provided additional colour to this one, I hope provides you some further reassurance around the importance of this work, both in terms of, for example, the group work and the reversion activities, but also critically the establishment for MAPA, Pan Lanarkshire, the dedicated justice MAPA service, in terms of how we provide support to some of the most, the individuals with greatest risk to our communities, and to do that in a way that meets both their needs and the needs of the wider community. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Suman. Eileen.
Thank you, Chair. I think, again, what we were discussing earlier, and David Watson actually picked up the points I was going to raise with regards to finance, and if there's any certainties that, you know, the finance would always be there, which it is today, but who knows tomorrow. And I think it's right that we try to intervene to keep people maybe at a younger age especially out of, you know, the justice system, and not have a stigmatisation when they come for even a taxi badge licence. And you go back 10 years, but then there's a bit where you can see started to behave, and then, you know, but it's there forever. But one of the questions, 4.10, it was the community payback orders. Now, I'm quite sure it was the last meeting that we had, and I remember asking or saying something about it. There was a lot of people who didn't turn up to fulfil the hours that they were supposed to undertake, type of thing. So I was saying that this new system will help with that, to make sure that people do turn up. But at what point then, if everything else we've put in this paper, if all else fails, what would be the next steps? Because also we have to remember about victims, and sometimes the victims of crime and or whatever else has happened to them feel very let down that that nobody really cares about them. So am I right in assuming that hopefully these new posts might make people, or should try and make people turn up to what they're supposed to turn up to? And if at the end of all that, nothing's going to help, where does it go from there? The public don't just think this is an easy ride for people to, you know, to get off sort of what they would say is scot-free. It's no, I know it's no, but that's the questions that I would like answered. I definitely remember that there was not a big concern, but there was a point where it was in a paper saying that, you know, there was a consistent lack of people who just didn't engage, for want of a better word. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. Gillian, do you want to come back?
And thank you, Councillor Logan, for that question. I suppose just to clarify, I think what you're referring to, we'd spoken about at a previous committee, was round about people maybe not attending for unpaid work, induction and placement. Well, this proposal in 4.10 is around about people that are on supervision rather than just unpaid work. There may be people with combination orders, but this is focusing specifically on the supervision. You are right, there are certainly issues in terms of being able to retain people through their unpaid work order, and that's something we always actively try and address and support people in. What I would say though is that what we know from group work in supervision is that there tends to be quite high retention rates within that. You can see that from moving forward, making changes in the Caledonian system programmes. So we're confident that we will be able to retain people during the period of their group work. In terms of your second question around about what if this fails, what I would say is that we're proactively working to the direction of the Scottish Government's Vision for Justice strategy, and it's very important to us in South Lanarkshire that we are ensuring that we provide people with as many effective community alternatives to custody as possible. And what we know from the research and evaluation that's been done previously is that people have a far better chance of succeeding in terms of employability, stable housing and coming out of the justice system when they're on a statutory order compared to when they're in custody. So I appreciate there is a lot of work to do going forward, but I think that this approach will yield good results for both service users and also people in our communities. I hope that helps answer the question.
Thanks, Gillian. You okay with that, Eileen? Yep. Okay, thank you. Kirsty.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Hello, Gillian. I just wondered if you'd be able to provide a bit more context in terms of section 4, specifically paragraph 4.2. Welcome particularly the establishment of a dedicated Justice MAPA service, but I wondered I noted obviously that between 2014 and 2022 there'd been a 57% increase in MAPA level 1 cases in Lanarkshire. Would you be able to advise how that compares with national figures? Also, just as I said, in terms of context, just describe the differences in nature of offending or type of offending between level 1, level 2 and level 3, because understandably people are going to be perhaps rather alarmed at that increase in terms of level 1 offending. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Williams. Yes, I can certainly look to provide you with figures of how we compare with other areas, but I think what we do know is that there is an increase in both internet-related offending and historical sex offending across Scotland. So, you know, we're not outliers in the numbers of increases. I mean, there's a number of things, as I've mentioned, the Strategic Oversight Group has a governance responsibility around about how we are trying to both future-proof and manage risks for those that commit sexual offences. What I think I would say is, though, we are taking a range of measures to look at our review process that we have for level 1, level 2 and level 3 cases that will help to look at managing the increase in workload for Justice Social Work and Police Scotland. In terms of your question round about the differences between level 1, level 2 and level 3, I actually have a paper that sets that out, so I can provide that after the meeting if that would be of assistance. But ultimately your level 1 service users are your lower risk, your level 2 are your higher risk, and your category 3 are your critical few, people that pose significant risk within the community. I would just like to reassure the committee there are very few category 3 people that we manage across Lanarkshire. So yes, it's quite a complicated area of work. And I suppose at the heart of what we're trying to demonstrate here is that effective risk assessment and risk management planning is critical in terms of safely managing people in the community. And that's what we determined this type of model would provide. We do recognise that it is ambitious and that there are a few areas in Scotland that have taken this type of model and approach, but we recognise with the introduction of MAPS going forward that we have to diversify, take measured and appropriate risks in terms of how we future-proof the service going forward. As demonstrated, this is an area of increasing work. I hope that helps answer the question, and happy to provide the data I've spoken about afterwards.
Thank you for that, Gillian. And also just a wee additional question here. Obviously working in this area of work is really challenging psychologically, and obviously workers in a dedicated MAPA service, their entire caseload is going to be in relation to individuals who have committed sex offences. So I just wondered what arrangements are in place to support members of staff to try and limit the impact of vicarious trauma on our staff. Thanks, Gillian.
Very good question, and one we've given considerable thought to. This is not a new area of work for us. We do have a specialist intervention team in Justice currently, and where our highest risk service users are managed. We recognise the need for strong and robust supervision and support for our staff, and we do use, where necessary, our external counselling service to support staff who are experiencing challenges. What I would say is, because of our, I think, historical track record in terms of supporting staff, ensuring that there's a good balance of caseload between low, medium and high risk service users, I think we get that right. And I would say, I think that the support that team leaders and operations managers give their staff, is exemplary. So I'm confident that we'll be able to support staff going forward in this. One of the other things, and maybe not quite padded out in the report, is that we don't see retaining staff in this specific MAPA service long term. We see this very much as a development opportunity. People are able to come in, do this work for 2 to 3 years, and then think about progressing throughout justice services. And we see that very much as people's personal development, as well as thinking about succession planning within the service as well. So I suppose I would just like to give reassurances we wouldn't be looking to retain staff in this type of area long term.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, and thanks for that response, Gillian. I don't see any more questions. Do we agree to the recommendations in the report? Section 2? Agreed. Okay, and thanks for presenting that, Gillian. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Next item is items for noting, and item 9 is sustaining social work children and family service budget recovery actions update, and that's pages 73 to 80. And could I ask Liam to speak to the report again? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on the budget recovery actions to address the projected £10.6 million overspend or budget pressures within Children and Family Services for 2024-25, and to give an update on ongoing reviews and policies, procedures and the service contracts. Section 3 gives a background to the report. You'll be aware that we brought a report to the committee in March, and what we gave a commitment to was to bring an updated report for each committee cycle so that we could see the progress that's been made. Section 4 just restates the Sustainability and Values Options Appraisal Scale, and that's the tool that we will use to make sure that we're prioritising our public protection and legislative requirements when we're taking any budget decision about service delivery. In relation to the main parts of the report for the update, these are highlighted at section 5 within the report, and I'll touch on each of them individually quickly. You'll see at 5.1 we gave a background to the housing and social work prioritisation, and that was working closely with housing colleagues to try and support care experienced young people back into the community, predominantly from high cost placements, but wherever they were at within their care journey. In terms of a good news story, we've been successful in getting a big lottery funding of £132,000, and that's in partnership with Housing and Barnardo's, and we're going to target 4 young people who are seen as needing intensive support. Those are those young people that have probably been through the most trauma in their care journey, and what we're trying to do is support them back into the community. Again, we'll be targeting those that are in high cost placements as well, so that's a good piece of progress since the last report. In relation to 5.2, you'll see that what we gave an undertaking was to look at a tender for an intensive family support service, and that was costing £1.2 million over a 3-year period. Just to update the committee that the tender is now in the public service portal, and we've got expressions of interest that are now coming in for that resource, and we're looking to close that by the end of May or June, and again we're on track to try and have that service commissioned and up and running in August, with a start date for December 24. So again, if that comes to fruition, and we're confident it will, if we can reduce the numbers of looked after children by 20, then that will give us a significant saving going forward. In relation to 5.3, you'll see it's an update of the reviews of policies and procedures, and there's 3 that we were looking at: fostering and kinship rates and continuing care, supported carer rates and adoption allowances. We've currently started those reviews, and we'll be bringing a report to the next committee in August with an update on that and for approval. In relation to 5.4, and it's the undertaking of the service reviews, 2 reviews we identified last time was a counselling service within social work and emergency social work service. Both reviews have actually started, and we'll be in a position to bring an update of the counselling service to committee in August, again for noting and for approval of any changes to that service. In relation to the emergency social work, we're still aiming for January 25 for an update. In relation to 5.5, it's reviews and updates of contracts. We've reviewed all contracts across children and family services, and any contracts that are coming to an end or are out of contract will no longer be supported going forward, as we've got no financial solution for them. And for those contracts that are currently within scope and that do have a commitment to them, we are undertaking reviews of all those providers, and we're looking to see if there's any efficiencies that can be made within current contracts. We gave a commitment last time that that will be in line with what our statutory requirements are, and we'll continue to work within the statutory requirements of any of the contracts. 5.6 is a review of the community transport for voluntary groups. This was added in following the last meeting, where we're actually looking at a review of all our transport arrangements, and these are based on legacy transport arrangements for community groups. There's currently 136 individuals accessing the council's fleet transport, and what we're doing is we're doing a review of all those services based on, as I say, these are historical, but we're trying to be fair to say why are some people getting access to transport and other organisations aren't. So we're looking to bring a report back to the committee in August about how we would continue with transport. Section 6 within the report is about employee implications. There's no employee implications at this time for the report. However, the counselling service and ESWS will bring that to future committees. In relation to Section 7, it's the financial implications. It restates the fact that we've got a £10.6 million overspend and budget pressure for this financial year. It also highlights that we've got 132,000 from the big lottery in partnership with Barnardo's, and we'll look to continue with that over the next 2 years. And in relation to the intensive family support service, we've actually got the tender out and we're looking to award by the end of August. So happy to take any questions, Chair, but it is just for noting.
Thanks, Liam. Don't see any questions. People agreeable to the recommendations in the report? Sorry, Alec.
Sir, I was debating whether to ask. Seems a little bit strange at 5.12 that we weren't taking these actions anyway. Yes, we're getting 130,000 from Barnardos, but you're suggesting savings of 0.8 of a million a year. Why weren't we doing that even if we weren't getting the Barnardos money?
Thank you, Councillor. We actually were undertaking that work, but what we recognised that those young people that were in most need of support, we didn't actually have the resources to wrap around them to make sure that they could sustain a tenancy. So whilst we were looking at young people who were ready to move on, and we were doing that, for those young people who were in high cost placements who were not ready, we've now got a resource, but we've got the big lottery funding and the resource with Barnardos, and we'll be able to support them appropriately within the community. What would have been wrong is for us to allow those young people to go into their own tenancies, for it to fail and for them to go through that homelessness cycle, and that's often what happens with young people who are not ready. So this allows us to get a better outcome for those going forward.
Okay, thanks, Liam. Okay, don't see any more questions. We agree to note recommendations in the report. Agreed. Thank you. Item 10 is the Lanarkshire Winter Plan 2023 to 24 debrief, and it's pages 81 to 88. And could I ask Craig again to speak to the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a debrief from our winter planning process for 23-24, and as was touched on earlier, there is a series of issues that occur round about winter that require a distinct set of planning arrangements around those, such that whilst we recognise that many of the issues are ongoing, there are some areas which require that specific response. And as you work through the paper, we will be able to demonstrate some of those. So just running through the main paragraphs within the paper, the plan that we developed was a multi-agency plan. It involved both councils, both health and social care partnerships, and indeed NHS Lanarkshire, as well as a number of external partners. And we tested that through our Lanarkshire Resilience Planning arrangement, where we had a tabletop exercise called Winter Breach. It was actually hosted next door in the corporate dining room, and we used that as part of the testing for some of the planning that we were looking to potentially put in place. It was specifically around a flood issue, which recognises the increased incidence of inclement weather as part of the global crisis that we see just now. We touched on earlier the particular issues that exist across the hospital systems at the moment, and in particular around unscheduled care. And the Health and Social Care Partnership played a crucial role, continues to play a crucial role in something called Operation Flow. And the paper describes that in greater detail. However, the main purpose of that is to try and maximise flow through the hospital system. So, where possible, only taking people to hospital who need to go to the hospital. Thereafter, only admitting those who need admitted. Beyond that, having people in hospital for as short a time as is safe to do so, and then for us to be able to support early discharge from hospital, and indeed put in place some of the situation and services around those patients to make sure that they're continued to be safely managed once home. We then looked at some of the areas where we had some issues in the past, and one of those was around maximisation of staff. So how do we try and encourage we've got as many people available across the peak periods, that we don't allow too many people to go off all at the same time. And whilst that sounds something that's fairly straightforward, it is a big ask to ask people who would like to spend Christmas, New Year, etc. with families to come in and work. But that's increasingly what we're doing, so that we're not seeing that dip in performance across that whole flow process. And we had a good example of how that worked over the period. We also maximised our joint working with other agencies, and I've included within the report a couple of examples of what we've done with Scottish Ambulance Service, as well as our community pharmacists. Our GPs in Lanarkshire, again unique to Lanarkshire, also provide a service across the 4th day of the 4-day public holiday periods, and indeed on Saturdays through January. And what that meant was that 3,000 people who would otherwise have had to either attend out of hours or accident emergency were able to access services through their own general practice. We also put in place a number of things to help mitigate the impact of winter. One of those in particular being the vaccination programme, and we provided that across the entirety of the county and put in place a range of issues to try and make sure we were maximising uptake of the same. And when we compare the rates of uptake nationally, Lanarkshire outperformed the national average for those in categories SIMD 1, 2 and 3 for flu, and SIMD 1 and 2 for COVID. So we got more people in those harder to reach areas vaccinated than was the case across the rest of the country. We also see managing infection prevention control as a key area across the entirety of winter. That's one of the areas where it's particularly prevalent that we've got good controls around that in winter. And you'll see from the report that one of the areas that we will look to revise and review next year is making sure that there is as much concentration on flu as there is on COVID, and that now that most of the population is vaccinated, the likelihood is that flu will do more to harm you than COVID. So it's really important that we get early identification of people who have got flu. We touched earlier on performance reporting, and we will do that through the updated use of data, and increasingly we're able to get just-in-time data that allows us to make quick changes to some of the flow through the hospitals, and indeed what that means for the partnerships. And we will also continue to maximise our communications programmes. There was a whole comms programme undertaken for winter again, and one of the things that we need to do, as Councillor Logan touched on earlier, is to make sure that there's more and more of the population understand the range of services that are available to them throughout the year, such that when it comes to winter, they're not then thinking that they can only go to a GP or only go to an A&E. There are lots of other services out there that can assist. And finally, just to note that it's only a couple of months till we'll be starting the programme for 24-25 winter planning, and you'll see within the recommendations that we would look to bring back what the plan would look like for 24-25. And happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Craig. Robert?
Yeah, just a quick question, if I may, Chair. The vaccination programme at 4.7 talks about the need for greater uptake of NHS staff vaccination. Now, it seems quite extraordinary, given the greater knowledge that the staff presumably have about the downside of not getting vaccinated, that this is the case. What's the problem there? Is this refuseniks, so to speak, or is it just people not bothering, or what is it exactly that's causing the problem there?
I think it's multifactorial, and interestingly, when we looked at our comparisons nationally, it was people who were in SIMD 4 and 5, in other words, the most affluent of individuals, and those who you would think would have most knowledge and understanding around why it's really important to get your flu vaccine every year and your COVID vaccine, that were taking a judgment not to get vaccinated. Now, one of the things that we have been doing with our staff is to try and reinforce the message around why it is very important to get vaccinated. We've sought to put in place something called peer vaccinators, where we're going round wards and offering vaccines to people in their workplace. We've offered vaccinations, so if there's a member of staff who lives in Lanarkshire but works in Glasgow, they can attend the Lanarkshire clinics. So there's a whole range of things that we're trying and get that level up, but it has been stubbornly low. And again, this is not something that's unique to Lanarkshire, and it's an area where we're trying to get some national support from our professional leads in really trying to encourage staff to get vaccinated.
I may be way off beam here, but is this not something that should be a condition of contract for people in this? I mean, they're not just a danger to themselves if they're not getting vaccinated, they're also got a public health element to the thing as well. I appreciate you don't want to take a heavy hand to all of this, but it does seem that it's something that needs to be given as much backing as we possibly can on it.
Yes, so absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why we're trying to get that professional support. So we did put out messaging. We had the medical director and the nurse director pointing out the fact that not just would it be a good thing for the individual, but it would be good for their families and it would be good for their patients, that if they had that additional protection, then they were less likely to pass on infection. However, it is very much still voluntary. And ultimately, if we inject somebody without their permission, then it's assault. So it's not something that we can say is mandatory that everybody must get vaccinated. So it is very much still an optional thing. And sadly, so particularly around the patient groups, we have literally called virtually everybody who's not been vaccinated to say, can we assist you in making it easier for you to be vaccinated? We can arrange for access to a clinic. We can even, on occasion, arrange for a domiciliary visit. But we are getting this thing called vaccination apathy, where because more people have been vaccinated multiple times, they're now not wanting to be vaccinated at all. So there's a big public health message out there that we need some national support with as well.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I agree that's something that really would need to be looked at nationally through the Scottish Government. Could I ask, Craig, see 4.36, the sector-based flow oversight boards, what stage they're at and what the sector would cover? And I take it it's obviously sort of multi-agency across health, social work, acute, all of that, because I think that's a really kind of positive development, because that's going to capture obviously, any potential issues and get them, kind of rectified and tackled, because sometimes that element is missing. So if just a wee sort of update on that would be great, thanks.
Yes, thank you. So we have got 3 site oversight boards, one for each of the 3 main hospitals. So Hare Myers, Monklands and Wishaw. The ones that we particularly participate in are Hare Myers and Wishaw. And these are the areas where we try and share good practice and get the clinical teams and the hospital social work teams in particular working together. So there's something called, for instance, planned date of discharge. So if somebody's admitted and the multidisciplinary team and the doctors say, right, Craig's been admitted on Monday, he's got a urinary tract infection, we would anticipate that the antibiotics would kick in and we would expect he would be home on Thursday. And they would then notify that to the hospital social work team, such that if I had care at home support in place, then that could be lined up to make sure it was ready for my discharge. Or if it's something more catastrophic and it was a new care at home package, that could be set up as well. If that planned date of discharge is not met, then that means that we have set up a package of care that is then not able to be used for that purpose, and could and should have been used for something else. So if we've got good joint working across that, so that we've got early notification of any changes to that, then that helps in terms of that flow. Picking up on the point that was made earlier around reablement and Home First, again, we are really trying to push people being discharged, if they've got care at home, then on the package that they had prior to admission, or if they didn't have care at home, then allowing the person to go home such that they could be assessed in their own home, because we know that if somebody's assessed in a hospital, then it tends to lead to an over-provision, because the person's in unfamiliar surroundings, they're likely to be unwell, confused, whereas if in their own home, and we get an assessment done in their own home, it's much more likely to reflect their own needs. So that's the type of thing that we pick up at the site flow boards, so that we're able to try and embed that good practice and generally move to where we need to get to.
Thanks, Craig. That kind of clarifies the kind of practicalities and the mechanics of it, because obviously we're aware, because you've kept the committee really well informed of those developments, but that kind of crystallises how you keep an overall strategic overview of it and how it's actually rolling out and progressing. So thank you for that. I don't see any more questions. Do we agree to the recommendations in the winter plan? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 11, the response process regarding mobility aids in South Lanarkshire and conflict zones. That's pages 89 to 92, and could I ask Suman to speak to the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to this report. So members will recall the discussion that took place at the meeting of the Council on 27 March and the request that was made of officers to investigate the following 3 items under 3.11. In other words, to look at the mechanisms to return, reuse and respond to calls for donations of mobility aids in South Lanarkshire and in conflict zones. To then look at for officers to highlight how the Council could work with existing organisations and groups to support those in conflict zones where its stock where the medical need is greater due to conflict, while still complying with legal duties. And finally, how the Council could further encourage residents to return old or used mobility aids to relevant health partners, reducing waste and ensuring people who need the items could get them. The report's been prepared on that basis and have agreed with the Chief Executive this is the appropriate committee to provide visibility on these matters too, accepting it's of interest to the wider Council as well. What I would specifically draw your attention to under section 4 then is paragraphs 4.5 and 4.6 in respect to the first bullet in terms of the commitments made in respect to recycling items already within the arrangements we have within South Lanarkshire and Lanarkshire, and also the fact that that there's an element of savings that have already been attributed to the use of recycled items, given the pressures we have on all our resources locally. I would then draw your attention to paragraph 4.7, which talks specifically about the limitations on the Council's role in respect of this, but also then pointing up 4.8, which talks about how NHS Scotland operates within that space, and specifically draw attention to the NHS Scotland Global Citizenship Programme. And then in terms of the final bullet point, to then draw your attention to 4.10, in terms of the information provided within the Scottish Government Ready Scotland website, which provides advice on how individuals can help humanitarian crises around the world in a safe and effective way. Having highlighted all those points, I would bring committee back to the recommendation of the 2.1 and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Suman. I don't see any questions. Are people happy to agree the recommendation in 2.1? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 12, notification of contracts awarded 1st of October 2023 to 31st of March 2024, and that's pages 93 to 98, and could ask Suman again to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So committee will recognise this is the standard report we bring here, the background for which is set under 3.1, and as the Chair has highlighted, the Appendix 1 sets out the contracts awarded for the period 1st of October to the 31st of March. I would take committee back then to the recommendations under 10.2.1 and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Suman. Alan.
Thanks, Chair. There's just a couple of the ones on page 95. 4 for the bottom, 700,000 care homes for adults with learning disabilities, including autism. how many actual adults is that we've referred for that? And the other question, the bottom one, care home in England and Wales, nearly £250,000. How many people is that for?
I can pick that up. So all of those placements will be, highly specialised placements for folks with very, high levels of dependency, very particular needs. So I haven't got the exact numbers here. I can get that to you, but we won't be talking about large numbers of people. So there'll be individual, high dependency, high cost, high value kind of care packages where the social work service, along with family members, will have identified the most appropriate service to meet that person's needs, and that may well be out with the local area. Yeah, so again, I haven't got the exact figures, but I would imagine we're talking about small numbers of people in those placements. So it's the same response I've already given you, really, that these will be very particular placements for very particular circumstances, and some of those placements can be very expensive.
Okay, one more, Alan.
Oh, thank you. The reason I'm asking, I mean, if that's £80,000 a year, when we were discussing the closure of the home in Lanark, one of the IGIB members pointed out it's £32,000 a year to keep somebody in care. So we're paying £82,000 or £83,000 a year in that bottom one to somewhere in England and Wales. If you could get the figures back to me, I'd be obliged.
I can certainly get the figures, but I probably want to reinforce that these placements, we're probably not talking about a standard kind of care arrangement. We may be talking of situations where there's multiple care staff involved all the time looking after the individual, so 2-to-1 care, 4-to-1 care, 6-to-1 care, 24/7, 7 days a week. So those kind of care packages are very, very staff intensive and therefore are expensive.
Thanks, Ian. I think anything further than that, Alan, you could maybe take up out with the meeting. I mean, that's always been the situation. We have had those instances where we're supporting people with highly complex needs. This isn't unusual for a figure like that to be there, but I think really it would be better taken up maybe with Ian out with the meeting. Kirsten?
Yeah, sorry, Margaret. I suppose, again, just to echo what Ian is saying, is that you're not necessarily comparing apples with apples, you're probably comparing apples with bicycles. So it's a complete, they're completely different. There's no such thing as a standard care home provision. This particular individual may have highly complex needs, but I suppose this just illustrates, how costly it is to provide good care to the most vulnerable members of our society, and how meeting these costs can have unexpected pressures on the budget for the social work resource.
Sorry, is it the same thing, Alan? Because we could maybe cover it outside the meeting.
We have got 20 people with critical dementia in a home in Hamilton which we're shutting, and we're now looking at
Sorry,
critical
Alan, I'm not actually going to go down. It's not really relevant to what we're discussing here. As I say, maybe out with the meeting we can have this discussion. It's not really relevant to this specific paper. I don't see any more questions. Are we agreeable to the recommendations in section 2 that the contracts awarded be noted? Agreed. Thank you. I don't have any items of urgent business, so could I just thank everyone for attending and the officers as usual for their excellent reports and contributions. And could I also say a kind of personal thank you before we go to Tracy for all the support she has given me since I've been chair of this committee. She's not leaving, so don't worry about that. It's just a sort of reshuffle and people are getting moved about. But I just put it on record as just that, you know, personally we were dealing with all the technology, all the teams, how helpful Tracy has been to all of us. And I think we may see her again at some point, so we don't know it's definitely the last, but Anne-Marie McGonigal will be here for the next... Right, okay. But I would just like that on record to thank you for all of your expert support and help. Thank you. And with that, I will close the meeting. Thank you.